I can't help to ask, what are the values you have identified, and how do you operationalize that in your personal life, but also work life?
So first of all, I had to create a logic system. One of my problems and one of the problems with many leaders is that we're really stubborn and we think we know better than everybody else, even though our job shows us that that is like patently false over and over again. Like you're wrong all the time and like you have to rely on your teams and like hire people that are smarter than you, but you still end up thinking you know everything. And so for something as personal as personal values, I knew it was really important for me to come up and construct my own logic system. And so I'm going to be releasing a series of documents on like that journaling that I did on how I came to that logic system. But it goes something like this, which is that the first thing is I wanted to understand what like every human's mission was. And so I had to like philosophically ask myself, am I the same as other humans? And the answer is like, yes. And if the answer there is no, you should go to therapy and understand why not. But like if the answer is yes, then it's like, what is the ultimate human mission? And the ultimate human mission is to increase consciousness in some way, shape, or form. And actually, you can't not do that. Even if you decide you don't want to do that, the way that you live your life and the way that people follow your lead in any way increases some part of human consciousness. And so then I asked myself, well, what is the atomic unit of consciousness? And I landed on the answer that it's values. And so it was really important for me to define which values I wanted to increase within human consciousness over my lifetime. And then from there, I decided to take the things that I find or I'm naturally good at, or the privileges that I have in my life, the access that I have in my life, and then develop goals and strategies that align with maximizing those values in human consciousness. And then I asked a bunch of questions like, how do you limit the values? Like, do you limit the values? Like, this is like a long conversation, but essentially my values are in this order: freedom, authenticity, courage, inspiration, and kindness, in that order, which means that I care more about inspiration and I care more about courage than I do about kindness. And then I also talked about things, I told myself things that I thought I cared about that actually I don't care about anymore. So I thought I really cared about maximal humility. And then I realized that if I actually want maximum effect on human psychology, I need to be okay with not being humble all the time. And so like there were things that came out of this that like I ended up solidifying that I've always kind of wrestled with, and I never really put pen to paper. My abstract mission is to increase those values as much as I possibly can in human consciousness over my lifetime, and ideally past my lifetime, because my lifetime's minuscule. And then a bunch of goals come from that.
How does that take shape in the way you work with your team?
So here's one example, right? I've started I've started posting. So fitness is like such an important part of my life. I've started posting like shirtless pics on Twitter, and I have heard from our new VP of people several times that this is causing problems for certain Loommates who don't want to see those photos, right? But my ultimate value is freedom. And so I'm like, okay, as long as I'm not harming the company, as long as there is some outset for this that I believe in, which for me, I like the thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to promote more health with especially within tech leaders. I look at most tech leaders and I'm like, oh my God, like you have no health. I can tell. I can see the way that like your body is. And that makes sense because like this is an incredibly demanding job. Maybe you have a family, you have other competing priorities, but I want to like combat that narrative and I want to increase overall physical health and mental health as a result of that. And so I decided that I wanted the freedom to be able to express myself over my Twitter that way. And the way that that materializes is that if I'm going to be given that freedom, like I expect, like I would give that freedom to anybody at Loom as well. And I'm not saying that that doesn't come with consequences. It might. Like maybe one day, like this ends up screwing up an enterprise deal for Loom. And Joe's like, hey man, like this is just problematic at this point. You need to like roll off. Fair enough, but I'm willing to do that. And so like other ways that this materializes, like some information got shared within the company that ended up decreasing the trust other Loommates had with me for a decision that I made within the people org. I won't go over the specifics because it will it will disclose information about the Loommates more than it will about. I don't mind like telling you about all the ways that I screwed up and things. But like basically, I sent a Loom to the folks that were disclosing this information. I was like, look, like ultimately, this is my fault. Like ultimately, the reason that people are less trusting of myself and leadership is because I made this decision and it was an experiment and I didn't roll back the experiment. And I was like, but if you continue to share this information, the result is that people will have less trust in me. And I'm just giving you the information and you can do whatever you want with it. You don't have to stop sharing this information if you don't want to, because I would never like infringe on your freedom to share information. I think that's really important. But if you do, these are the side effects. And like you have to be okay with that. Just so you know, like if you do this, your job is not on the line. I don't care. It's already happening. You should take the responsibility for how it proliferates throughout the org and figure it out on your own. You could juxtapose that with a message of me being like, hey, like stop sharing this or like you'll be fired. Or hey, stop sharing this because like you should really stop sharing this because X, Y, and Z. I think that like the way that you live your values has like they're only values if it's congruent completely in your life. And you can only have complete congruence of how you live your values in your life depending on what your goals are and depending on how much freedom you actually have in your life. And you have to actually earn your freedom over time. So if you don't have like if I didn't have enough access to capital for the rest of my life to be able to retire whenever I want to, I probably can't afford to like post a bunch of shirtless pics on Twitter and not care if I'm going to get fired. If I haven't like published several patents for Loom and have like helped the company scale through to like 1 billion minutes recorded on the platform and shown that I have technical prowess, I probably don't have the authority to be able to like have leverage to live my life in the full freedom that I want to. And so like there is this dichotomy of like everybody is born somewhat a slave to like some set of values or systems. And you have to break out of that over time with competency. And since we live in a capitalistic market, that competency is rewarded and commiserate with how much capital people give you to allocate. And so there's these natural gatekeepers. We could go into that conversation, but essentially, like the answer is that I try to live with as much congruence with my values in my work life as I do in my personal life. You only are able to get to that point with little consequence based on how much freedom you've bought yourself, and you gain freedom through competency. And so you just have to work really, really hard or not care about making a lot of money in order to live with full congruence of your values.
think it's really interesting to hear the examples of what living with that degree of freedom within the company looks like, because I think for people listening into this, I'm thinking of like a lot of scenarios that a lot of folks are running into is probably like they're taking on a surprise new role and increased scope of responsibility. And a lot of these things, sort of these challenges kind of come up unconsciously. And so what's I think interesting for me is hearing, your example in story in a lot of ways where it's extraordinary. And then for folks to be like, okay, like some of this I can bring into my life in different ways.